Okay, I don't think I've made it any secret that I don't think complex and sympathetic villains work in Disney movies, or most other movies for that matter. It seems that no matter how many times they try it, they just can't get it right, and often leads to mixed reactions regarding the characters at best. And as I've said in other videos, especially in kids' movies, villains actually have a very important part to play in the plot. So to screw them up can damage or even ruin the entire movie. And of course, I feel the best solution to this problem is for them to just go back to making the old fashioned evil just for the sake of it, yet still likable kind of bad guy. However, if Disney continues to insist on doing sympathetic and complex villains until they get it right, then they might just want to look back at one of their lesser efforts, because they actually have managed to do it before. And obviously, there will be some spoilers for all the movies I mentioned ahead, so if there's something you don't want ruined, you should be on the lookout. This will be your one and only warning. Alright, I don't think anybody would argue that the 2010s certainly weren't the best decade in terms of Disney villains. With the exception of King Candy, they've all been rather divisive for one reason or another, though plot twists more often than not usually had something to do with it. But one villain that I found to be particularly hated, and not in the good way, is Narami from Raya and the Last Dragon. Now, she does have her defenders, don't get me wrong, and if you liked the character, you are most certainly free to, but I do have to agree with the many people who say that she's a badly written character. Though personally, I wouldn't say it's exactly the character herself, but more how the narrative treats her that's the problem. But the point is, you wouldn't believe how frustrated I've seen some people get when it comes to her. I've even seen grown men literally want to tear their hair out over the part where she tells Raya she's just as much to blame for Sisu's death, and the narrative treats her as correct for saying this. And all I can really say to that is they do have a point. If anything, Sisu's death comes from her not trusting the heroes rather than Raya not trusting Narami. Seriously, this was far from Disney's best effort in many departments. I still say they should have gone with having her be a straight villain who was controlling the drone. That would have been much better. And of course, if you've seen my Pixar Problem video talking about villains, you already know exactly how I feel about Professor Callahan. I mean, just because his daughter was lost in an accident gives him no excuse to go to the lengths he does. It's just like what Rocket says to Groot and Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy. Everybody's got dead people, but that doesn't mean you go around making everybody else pay for it. I mean, if she were to have died in a car accident, would he have tracked down the other driver and killed them for it? Because based off his behavior in the movie, that certainly seems like what he would do. A villain needs more than a sad backstory or motivation to be sympathetic. They need to have a degree of humanity, show that there are certain things they won't do, or even express a degree of remorse for their actions, among other things. Now, different combinations of those elements will and won't work depending on the story, but Professor Callahan doesn't have any of them. He only starts expressing remorse after his daughter is revealed to be alive, and by that point I'd say it's too little, too late, and only reinforces that he went way too far, much farther than the narrative tries to say he went. But despite all of that, Disney did get it right once in that decade. It wasn't one of their official animated canon movies, but still made by them nonetheless. And that was in Tinkerbell and the Legend of the Neverbeast. Nix is absolutely everything they tried to do with Narami, only done right. She's the perfect foil to Fawn, being completely serious, no nonsense, and will do her job to protect Pixie Hollow at any cost. Now, she's most definitely the main antagonist and a credible threat, but from the beginning it's obvious that she's doing it for the right reasons. She only wants to capture the Neverbeast because she genuinely believes he'll destroy Pixie Hollow, and has a frosty relationship with Fawn because she believes, and not all that unreasonably, that she's a reckless nuisance. Even her belief that the Neverbeast is some terrifying monster out to destroy everything comes down to her being misinformed because her source was incomplete, thus making her actions completely understandable. In fact, her point of view is so understandable that at one point even Fawn herself and possibly the audience comes to believe that she's right. And finally, when she destroys Gruff's final tower under the mistaken assumption that it'll fix everything, when Fawn calls her out on the truth and then immediately sees direct evidence that she was right, she just stands there stunned with a look of complete remorse on her face. Does she try to pass the blame? No. Does she hide behind the fact that she had no way of knowing the truth? No. The only thing going through her head at that moment is that Pixie Hollow, the place she had promised and dedicated everything to protect, is probably going to be destroyed, and it's all her fault. From there, Fawn has to snap her out of it, and she spends the rest of the movie trying to do everything she can to make up for her mistakes, no matter how small it may be. Now, my point with all of this is, if you want an antagonist, especially in a kid's movie, to be sympathetic, that's exactly how to do it. Sure, maybe you can't exactly call her a villain, and definitely not a bad guy, but she is the main force working against Fawn for most of the movie and is even treated as a rather large threat because of it. And not to mention, she does unwittingly cause the climax to escalate, so she basically does everything in the story that a villain would do. The difference, however, lies in her motivation. She has good intentions from the start and knows how to execute those intentions, and they never once change. Even her friction with Fawn mostly comes down to the fact that they have two different interpretations of what the right thing to do in a given situation is. Her actions are understandable and even sympathetic, but never to the point that you're rooting for her over Fawn. And her misinformed belief on the Neverbeast is so easy to understand that even Fawn is quick to forgive her for believing what she did. Because at the end of the day, she was a victim of incomplete information and ended up drawing the wrong conclusion. It's obvious that had she known the truth, she never would have done what she does. And that's why when she freezes up upon realizing the grave mistake she just made, it's easy to feel sorry for her. Because you know that all she wanted to do was protect Pixie Hollow, and now she believes she just condemned it to total annihilation. You feel the pain and confusion of that moment. And even if she'd been a bit cold beforehand, you still feel bad for her because of it. That's how you do a sympathetic villain. Now, the Tinkerbell franchise was never as popular as Disney's main lineup of animated movies, but that still doesn't mean they didn't have their good points. And obviously, Nix was one of them. She's a good threat, but for perfectly understandable reasons, and when she realizes she was wrong, tries to make up for her mistakes rather than push the blame onto someone else. And that might make her all around one of the best sympathetic animated antagonists I've ever seen. So while Disney can't seem to make a sympathetic villain to save their lives in the normal animated canon, they ironically actually did a perfect job at it in one of their other franchises. And if you ask me, if they intend on making any more sympathetic villains in the future, they might just want to go back to this movie and take a few notes on how Nyx was done, if only to maybe understand where they had gone wrong with villains such as Narami and Professor Callahan. Okay, that pretty much wraps this video up. So now I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Nix is the perfect example of how to write a sympathetic villain in a kids' movie and demonstrates everything Disney has otherwise been getting wrong? Or do you like the direction Disney's been going in and that no changes are needed? Please feel free to tell me in the comments. And remember, if you disagree with me, that's fine. I've got no issues with you if you do. We all have our different tastes when it comes to our favorite villains, after all. And finally, thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate all the support, and I hope to see you all next time.